Hi, I'm Travis Davis, Vice President of Ship Operations, Battleship Texas Foundation. We're coming to you live, well, not quite live, from, I'm live, from, from the Battleship CIC, Combat Information Center, as it's its long-handled name. This space was added to the ship in 1943, and its primary purpose was to be kind of the central clearinghouse for information, and to, with that information, evaluate and determine what's friend, foe, threat, and just generally for the ship be the place that maintains situational awareness for the ship. So both for aircraft, for ships, for submarines, and then also for navigational purposes. So the two primary focuses of CIC, particularly this CIC, was navigation and, again, situational awareness for aircraft, ships, and submarines. So primarily like the battle space around the ship. The navigational component of that came into when the ship was doing in coastal maneuvering, in formations, and to provide navigational information while the ship was doing shore bombardments. So, for instance, like southern France, the weather was lousy at southern France. Couldn't really see the coast. So CIC provided a radar plotting of the coast that the ship's navigators could plot where the ship was at and keep an accurate track of that. CIC maintained that. Now, you might think because of CIC's Combat Information Center that this space would have a huge hand in firing the main guns, that kind of thing. It really didn't. On the combat side of things, what CIC did was it provided targeting information. So it would say, that ship there, that's a target. Here's where it's at, and then that information would get passed to the captain or to the gunnery officer in the plotting room, and then from that, those other areas of the ship would then create the firing solutions and start firing on that target. That was CIC's primary role. It wasn't controlling the actual laying of the guns and where the ranging of the targets and things like that. It was, hey, there's a target over there. It's about 10,000 yards away. It's about 330 degrees true. That's a target. Shoot at it. That's what CIC did. Same thing for like aircraft. So if an aircraft was coming in, the equipment in here would say, hey, that's a friend. Don't shoot at it. Then the CIC would lay, hey, bearing 030, 15,000 feet, 20,000 yards. That's a friendly aircraft. Don't shoot. Or conversely, hey, that's a bogey. Or rather, that's a bandit because it's identified as a target. That is, shoot at it. Take it out of the sky. Which the ship did a few times. So again, CIC's primary function was to provide situational awareness to the ship. And the two main components of that were navigation, and the other for, observation of threats and other ships around the ship. The primary ways that CIC did that obviously was radar. The second was the ship's lookouts. And the third, and probably the most important, was communication. The ship didn't have a sonar suite on. Otherwise, that's where that would have been into the fold as well. So if we were on a destroyer, that would have been part of that information. That's not to say that the ship did not get sonar information. It got it from using the communications, the radios. Now that you know the basic function of CIC, we're going to walk around the room and give you kind of a walking tour of the space. Now, as we do that, keep in mind that at General Quarters, there were 16 men in this room. We know that from oral histories. So we have a few decent oral histories from our from some of the men that were up here, and so we have a fairly good idea of how many folks were in here and what their jobs were. So, for instance, let's start this walking tour off. This is an air plot, or rather, it's a polar plot. The ship would be right here in the middle, and then you would plot out, if there was an incoming raid of aircraft. There's a guy here called the 296 plotter, or 2096 plotter rather. That's that was a backup inter-fighter director control, or control circuit. So, and that was tuned to the picket destroyers, who were radar picket destroyers, who were then, with their radars searching out and saying, hey, we have a group of unknown aircraft coming in. This is probably a raid. It's pretty big. Here's the direction. Here's the bearing from a specific point, our reference point. Here's the range. Here's the rough altitude. So the ship had one plotter that all his job was to do was to listen to that frequency. And then as he would do it, as he listened, he would get the target information as it came in. So the raid was from the ship was relative 310 at let's call it 100,000 yards. So way out here. So he'd plot it here. He'd mark his time X, and then at the next track from the report in on the IFD on that raid, call it raid 1, it was at 320 at 90,000 yards. So he's able to track and then keep a plot of where it's at in relative motion to the ship, or relative to the ship. So in that way you can see if the raid was coming at you or going away from you. So next to him was also the was an SK talker. So the SK air search radar is not in this room. It's actually the control station for it is the console is down in radar 2, down on second deck, or auxiliary CIC. Again, this room is fairly small. It's jammed full of equipment, and then once you put the men in here, it gets even smaller. So all he was doing was listening to that circuit, talking to that operator, and then plotting those things plotting the same things as the ship's own radar was picking things up. And so you would get eventually where the ship would start picking up the same target, the same raid, and then tracking it. So this was only for air plot. So only air targets. Right there would be the ship's target designator. His primary function, he was an officer. His job was to evaluate the information, both from intelligence that the ship had, the known operational orders, information from the IFF, information from communication, information from these two guys, and then to make a determination if that raid or if that single aircraft out there, unknown aircraft, was a threat to the ship or not. So, and then he would say, yes, that's a threat. Anti-aircraft gunners, when that gets close, or he would actually, on his headset, call up to the air defense officer and say, hey, that's a target, bearing, give him the range, give him the bearing, give him the rough altitude, and say, that's where it's coming from, shoot it down. So that was his role, was just to designate air targets and then pass that information along. And then right here, there's supposed to be a radar console here, a PPI, or plan position indicator. There's one here and here. In front of that, we'll talk about those in just a little bit as we do the walking tour. In front of this one right here was another officer who was the evaluator, and it was the evaluator's responsibility. He was the main guy in CIC. All information that came in, he would take that and make the decisions on that. Is that friend? Is that foe? Is it a threat? Is it not? And then relay that information either to the captain or to the appropriate officers to make those to act on that information, and then all depending on standing orders and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of what we got going on right here. So you can see just right this little corner of the room, there are 5 people. There's not a lot of room here. And then as we walk around a little bit, I'll point this out again. You can see there's not a lot of room right here. So yeah. Oh, one last thing before we move on. So, I said bogey and I said bandit. So that's the nomenclature for targets in World War II. And target designation or identification is if it's an unknown air target, it's a bogey. If it's a known enemy threat, enemy air target, it's a bandit. As far as on the surface side of things, if it was an unknown surface contact, it was a skunk. And if it was an unknown, or if it was a known enemy target, it was called a robber. So, bandits and robbers, bad guys. Hey, no brainer there. Easy to keep track of there. It was also the unknown subsurface contacts. So, anyways, without further ado, let's get this walking tour going, and that's enough of me babbling about this area of the ship.
Her wars are over. She has won the right to rest peacefully in Texas waters.
All right, we are on the landing right outside of CIC. Here's the hatch. To give you a point of reference, there's the smokestack. There's the starboard crane. That is the superstructure deck, or as the modern Navy guys call it, the O1. There's the signal bridge right there and the flag bag. And then right here is CIC. And above us, that's navigation bridge, flag bridge, and then the fighting top. So before we go in, I want to pan the space real quick, and I want to say, just give an idea of how small the space is. It's not very big. It's a little bit bigger than a destroyer's CIC, and it probably has slightly more folks in it than a destroyer's, but it still eats up a lot of, the people in here still eat up a lot of the space. So, and you know, right here, that thing right there, that is the you know, the polar plot where we did the where I was talking to you earlier, and again, that had 4 people around it, so that gives you how crowded that corner of the world was. And we'll walk over there in just a second. So as we come in, here is the Dead Reckoning Tracer, or the DRT. This was mostly used for geographic plotting or navigation plotting. Charts could be overlaid on top of the glass here. There's this thing right here is called a bug, and what it did, there's a light bulb in it, and it projects this silhouette of bearing lines and range scales up onto a chart here, so you could actually chart whatever you wanted to chart. So whether it's relative bearings of ships, or if it's relative bearings of targets that are coming into you. In talking through this, I'm going to reference a lot of Okinawa. CIC was used at Normandy and at Iwo Jima and southern France. The DRT actually was used really heavily at southern France to support the shore bombardment, mostly because the beaches were obscured and a lot of targets were obscured by weather. So the SG radar was used to create kind of a picture of where all the navigation points are, and once that was done, or the coastline rather, and once that was done, that was laid onto the DRT so that the ship could kind of keep a good track of where they were at and really quickly cross-reference between what was actually the ship was actually at versus what the radar was saying, and then give corrections to the navigation bridge. That and those ranges between the ship and the shore, those reference points were then given to the plotting room to help them correct the shell fire of gunner the ship's gunnery, because again they were shooting, the targets were obscured and things like that, so they were able to, with that, knowing their distance offshore that CIC was providing, then they could use the information that spotting planes were providing to then calculate what their actual distance to target was and what the actual grid references were, so they could get fairly accurate gunfire in that way. So that's the importance of DRT. It was used every night at Okinawa as part of the ship's nightly retirement plan. And again, a chart called a maneuvering board was laid over. They would plot all the ships that were in the ship's formation as they went to the nightly retirement area off the coast of Okinawa. So they would steam out to sea and then come back to Okinawa in the morning and be on the gun line for fire control support, or fire support rather. And again, I want to emphasize, CIC did not provide gunnery information outside of navigation and target designation to either the main battery or the anti-aircraft. The ship CIC was primarily situational awareness. So, depending on what was going on, there could be a couple of guys around, 2 or 3 guys around CIC, the DRT. And over here we have we talked about earlier, the PPI, so the plan position indicator. This guy, for this one, the target designator would be standing right here. On this would be a screen the radar image would be projected on. He could select between, using this device, between the SG radar aft, the SG radar forward, which is in the directly above us at the top of the ship, the highest point of the ship actually, 136 feet above waterline, and then the SK radar, which is on the mainmast with the SG, the after SG radar. So he could select between that and see which radar he wanted to look at. So and go from there. Of course, we talked about this, the air plot. Here we have the, again, there was another PPI here with the evaluator or the CIC watch officer standing right here. Up here in this rack were intercom units, so the 21MC and the 24MC rather. One was for the captain, the other was for the admiral. And then here we have, those things would allow, those intercoms would allow obviously direct communication between the admiral to CIC or other stations on the ship without having to go through phone talkers or the ship service phone, which actually ship service phone set right here because there's a phone jack for it right here. Neat stuff, eh? Anyways, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we got to put back and fabricate, which we are. This space will get restored, and it will be open when the ship reopens to the public in 2023. So, continuing our walk around. Sorry, not to digress, but continuing our walk around, we have a TBS remote here and a TBS remote here. TBS was a short-range VHF radio that allowed ships to talk to each other. The TBS circuits on this ship and most ships is mostly at a task group level or a task force level, so that it was a radio net that all the ships could just get on and say, hey, there's a threat coming this way, hey, there's a threat coming this way. The bad thing about that is it wasn't a designator, hey, this is one guy talking. It was everyone pretty much jumping on at the same time, or could jump on at the same time, and just really bogged down the radio net. So it's like having 20 people talking to you at the same time. Texas used it mostly just for listening. Sometimes I would get out and say, hey, we picked up this, or hey, information intelligence has changed on this, but it wasn't particularly, again, it was mostly monitoring. And then on the TBSs, you could use a chess set that's like a phone talker, a headset and mouthpiece, or you could use a handset like just a regular telephone like this. Now the TBS is hung here, and where's the other one hanging? Oh, right here. Sorry, right there. Sorry. And then the remotes were also plugged into. Each one had their own speaker up here and here. You can see they actually have a volume knob on it, and then which allowed those circuits to be broadcast over the or played aloud in the room. Oh yeah. Speaking of communication, over here we have radio telephone units. There's one here, and here. Each radio telephone unit had a speaker amplifier that went with it. So there's 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. So that the user here could actually turn on a transmitter down below or activate a transmitter down below, pick up their handset, and actually use one of the more powerful transmitters on the ship to call over a broader radio network, or to talk to a large group of aircraft at the same time. Despite communications being one of the primary functions of or information dissemination being one of collection and dissemination, one of the primary functions of CIC, the communications facilities on the ship are very limited. That was one of the constant complaints in the later, particularly the Okinawa after action reports, is there just wasn't enough radio transmitters or receivers, particularly transmitters. So even the emergency radio room, which had 2 big transmitters in it that were for emergency purposes, were just being repurposed into being pretty much used all the time, particularly when there was an admiral aboard. So Admiral Fischler was aboard at Okinawa, and then or when the ship was serving as SOPA, or Senior Officer Presently Afloat. So kind of like a Commodore type thing without being a Commodore. So the other big piece here is the VG. So it is a projection radar repeater. So think of the PPI here as and then it just takes that radar image if it's on that little screen and blows it up here. So a couple of things that you could do with the VG is you could lay a chart over it. So just like you could on the DRT, and it would show all the ships around you, or and it'd help you plot, if you knew your ships, you could make sure your task group was staying in the right place. So you could plot out like Nevada, Arkansas, New York, I don't know, Quincy, Northampton, Astoria here. That's our little task group with Texas in the center. And you could, looking at that radar repeater, this being set to SG, one of the SG, or the Ford, like say the Ford SG, you could see those ships as radar pips. And so you could also see if they're moving out of formation, or if there is something another surface target coming into the formation. So that was very useful for that. The other function that the VG allowed is you could actually put a chart over this, or actually just a plain piece of paper over it, and you could do the same functions as the polar plot here, and you could actually just record the battle. So you had actually guys called recorders that would stand here and mark off, the different targets and raids and whatnot. So you kept track of the battle, and you had a record of it for later. And that was one of the functions of VG, and there was usually 3 or so guys around it, depending on what was going on. And then back here we have the SG transmitter. This is for the Ford SG, and as you see, this thing should be olive color. When the restoration was started several years ago, it had been painted white by someone before that. Back into the 60s, it was painted white, and they just painted it the wrong color. We're going to go back in and correct it. It should be olive drab, and we'll go from there. Let's see what this setting does. Oh, it won't let me change it. Never mind. I was going to see if I could do the fisheye look, but it won't let me do it. So yeah, and then all these missing components here, the knobs and gauges, and actually that's a CRT that's missing. We'll get those replaced, and so it'll look really well. And then you can see there's not a lot of room back here. And then over here, actually, sorry, right, real quick. This is a waveguide. This is a neat little thing. It's a hollow bronze tube that goes all the way up to the SG antenna at the top of the foremast, and the radar signal would just bounce through this guy all the way up to the top. And it would it's pretty neat. It's kind of like early fiber optic in a way. How a light bounces down a glass tube in a fiber optic. So at least that's how I think of it. Maybe that's a little inaccurate. I'm sure some more technically savvy folks will tell me how I'm wrong, which I'm glad when I'm getting told that I'm giving bad information or my analogies are bad. Anyways, so here is the Mark III fire control radar. So these are the oldest, or this is the oldest surviving radar on the ship. It was put on in 42, and it was its primary mission is fire control radar. So mostly just getting ranging data for the for main battery plot and the for surface targets for the ship to shoot. Despite it being here, again, this was not information from this guy was not generally used in here. It could be, but it generally wasn't. Let's see. And then here we get to the the CIC's IFF suite. So we have this guy, which is the ship's transponder. It's called an ABK. And it just basically sends out a signal that says, "Hey, I'm friendly. Hey, I'm friendly." And then as the other, either whether it be a ship or it be aircraft, their interrogator says, "Hey, are you friendly? Hey, are you friendly?" And that says, "Hey, I'm friendly." Then the ABK, with the ABK is the BN, which is the interrogator responser. So this guy is actually saying, for the ship, is going out to other aircraft or ships and saying, "Hey, are you friendly?" And then going from there. Cool thing, neat thing, is this guy right here. It was built in Boston Navy Yard, in 1943, and is a destructor for the BK, for the ABK. So you didn't want, if the ship were to be lost or scuttled, you wanted to destroy the transponder, and there was a little explosive charge in here, so that it would not, so that you couldn't reverse engineer, an enemy force couldn't reverse engineer it and use it to say, hey, I'm Battleship Texas, let me into your formation. I mean you no harm. I mean cause harm. So obviously you didn't want that to fall in the wrong hands, and that's what, yeah. Anyways, so moving on. So where that was, right next to the BN is this table here, which had the SG range and train indicator. So this was the actual console where the SG radar was operated, at least the forward SG radar was operated. And you can, yeah, where the forward SG radar was operated. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. We have a console. It's not original to the ship. It's at NRG right now. It's going to get restored and put in here, and or at least cosmetically restored and put back in here. That thing has a neat story to it. So once we talk about the completion of the restoration of this project, we might talk about that. The neat little history of that unit. Just want a quick shout out. Thanks Battleship Massachusetts for giving us that. That is pretty awesome of you guys. Thanks again, and thank those guys. They're awesome. Anyways, and then next to the SG console is the power supply or rectifier for the SCR-64, which is a radio transmitter or transceiver for, mostly was an aircraft radio. It was installed right before D-Day, and I think the best we can determine, the primary purpose was to talk to the Spitfires that our observation pilots were flying during D-Day. And then next to that, we have the radio desk. So there would be a guy sitting right here, and his job was to kind of listen to designated frequencies and keep a log of what was coming through. So up here we have an RBK, we have an RDK pan adapter, which would help with frequency identification to get the RBK onto the right frequency, an RBS, and then the RBS is power supply. Now, real quick, while we're still on the radio stuff, these were these 2, 3, and I guess you could count these 4 over here through the radio phone, and then the TBSs. Those were the only radio circuits coming in here. There were at least 8 radio frequencies that the ship can monitor, that were available to the ship to monitor any one time. You know, they were the local air raid warning, the inter fighter director circuit, the secondary inter fighter director circuit, the amphibious group, the air search, the combat air control, combat air patrol circuit. There was a lot of different channels that they could listen to, and besides the ones we've already talked about with the the TBSs. So there was more out there that the ship could tap into than they actually had the facilities to listen to. As I said earlier, the ship was very limited in its communication abilities, and it was, again, a constant complaint. So much so that, sorry, maybe I said this before, but when the ship was at off of Okinawa, because facilities were so limited, well, let me back up. When the ship was off Okinawa and up close to the coast, the terrain of Okinawa would obscure the ship's radar or air search radar, so it couldn't see targets that were, say, on the other side of Okinawa, or the airspace on the other side of Okinawa, because of mountains and ridges and that kind of thing. Because the communication circuits on the ship or the communication facilities on the ship were so limited, the ship couldn't listen to could only intermittently listen to the local air warning radio channel, and to say, hey, there's a group of there's a raid coming in from the other side of Okinawa from you, and you know, watch out. Well, they couldn't hear that, and the radar could only see so far. You couldn't see, through a mountain or through the terrain, so they couldn't see those threats until they came over the terrain and into the radar scope. So that's one of the ways that the limited communications on the ship kind of hampered CIC operations. And speaking of, I guess, radar again, one of the things I didn't mention at the beginning was another function of CIC was manning the radar countermeasures suite, or the RCM suite. So this status board, these two rails right here, there would have been another chalkboard in between here, and in that was the status board that said, hey, here's where we have incoming enemy radar from, or this is where we're sensing radar from, here's what we're jamming it on, here's what transmitter we're using, here's when it started, here's when it stopped, that kind of thing. So the RCM suite was actually in the main mast of the ship. Well, technically it had two, one down on the O1, pretty much right just below and to the port side of us, and then in the main mast there was the main RCM suite, which had the TDY transmitter and then the ANSPA sensors, or receiving sensors. So anyways, just a quick aside, the RCM suite was first installed in the ship right before Normandy, and the primary purpose of it was not to jam radar, it was to deflect German guided bombs, so like the Fritz X, like the one that hit Warspite off of Normandy. This ship actually detected a couple of those bomb guidance signals and jammed them, so we hope that made a difference, and the crew certainly thought that did, so I believe they did, and we have no reason to doubt them. So yeah, neat little history there. Sorry. Now we have a book rack here for manuals and things like that. So we've talked about pretty much all the people that were in here so far. We'll go through the room again. But there are also four radio talkers, four sound-powered phone talkers that would stand in here and just monitor the other circuits on the ship. So we have four guys. We have the target designator, that's 5. The 2096 talker and plotter, that's 6. We have the SK talker and plotter, that's 7. We have the evaluator, that's 8. We have the geographic plotter here at the DRT and his assistant, that's 910. The two guys that are around the VG, that's 1112. And then we have the two radar operators. They worked in shifts, so one might not be in here all the time, or might be doing an additional duty in here. So that's 13, 14. Then the radio operator recorder, so that's 15, and then plus the CIC watch officer. And then so that's 16. And then when there might have been a main battery liaison officer in here, just to kind of help with that kind of thing, but there were, the best we can tell, there really wasn't. A lot of other CICs had them as part of their setup, yeah. Okay, so last couple of things to point out is over here we have the status board, which was mostly to keep up with the ship's, the current information that the ship knew. The ship knew. Man, I cannot talk. So it'd have what the base course is, what their who the guide was of the formation, where they were, what the weather conditions were, what certain call signs were, what code words were, that kind of thing. So it was just a quick way for the folks in here to glance over and see, okay, the information I'm getting checks out against this, or hey, it doesn't check out against this. So that's the kind of thing, and that would get updated periodically throughout the watch as new information came in or information changed. And then of course over here we have wind direction, and then course here. So wind direction and course, and then also speed. So this is actually a pretty cool thing. So wind direction here, and then wind speed is on the outside. So right now this thing's pegged out at 80 knots. It's not 80 knots outside. And then a gyro compass repeater here telling you what the basic direction the ship's headed. and then the ship's pedometer log right here telling you how fast the ship's going. And according to this thing right now, we are knocking down 19 knots. So I don't think we're knocking down 19 knots. All right. So last thing in here, last few things in here rather, is we have main battery indicators up here, giving us range and direction of what the main battery is looking at and what they are targeting. So that's more information to help, I guess, with the situational awareness of CIC. And then we have another director indicator here, which we don't have. And well, as soon as we get more information on it, we will get it fabricated and at least get a proximity up if we can't find one. And then right here on this table was a model MAN radio unit. And then the MAN was just a Motorola cop radio. It's FM, short range, 1 or 2 miles. And the primary purpose of it was to allow CICs within a formation to talk to each other. And like I said, short range, so a ship just a little bit away could hear it and they could talk to each other and allow information to pass very quickly without cluttering up other communication channels. We've seen these on other ships, and it pops up in our inventory. It's a really neat thing. It was really one of the innovative things that the Navy was doing to try to maximize CIC. The other neat thing that the Navy was really innovative at with CIC was putting out magazines. One was called CIC Magazine. It was a monthly magazine that went out to every ship in the fleet, and it talked about all the new, latest and greatest things that the Navy was coming up with, Bureau of Ships was coming up with to improve the operations of CIC, and then also what ships were finding out what worked and didn't work. This ship was actually in an issue of CIC Magazine for southern France. There was a little article about a photograph that was taken on the PPI, and if I can find that photograph, we will get it up in here on the and so you can see it. Let's see, and then a couple of quick things here I want to point out to you before we go is all the steel in here on the aft end of the aft half of this compartment is non-magnetic. When I was looking at the original drawings for the construction of the space, it actually that was in there. I was like, why is that in there? It doesn't make sense. There was no notation of why it was there, and then it dawned on me. So, and two, not only that, but we brought a magnet down here and checked, and it's like, oh, there's magnet doesn't stick here, but it sticks over there. So that's part of the reason, so I was like, well, why is that? So I come up here and I realized right above us on that platform there was a magnetic compass, and that entire structure up there, that whole railing, the whole platform, all of that, including part of the chart house right there and part of this deck, is actually brass. So they wanted this to be non-magnetic, this half of CIC to be non-magnetic, so it wouldn't interfere with the compass, with the binnacle. So that's neat. The other neat thing is that if you notice the overhead, well, in certain light it looks gray, in others it's blue. It's actually the ship's deck blue. They wanted the overhead to be dark so it was less glare, less distracting, and so it was easier on the operator's eye, the radar operator's eyes. There's also a curtain here for the guys. And by the way, this space is not air conditioned. The only ventilation in here is that opening right there. And there's a fan over here. There was originally only a 3,000 cubic foot per minute fan in here. With that many folks in here, it got a little toasty. There was a curtain around the door here with a curtain rod. And the hatch was left open. I'm roasting. It's not a hot day today, but it's warm in here. So yeah. You might be asking why blue instead of like black or whatnot. And the best that we can figure is that the crew was or they just used what was available at the time. They had a lot of deck blue, so they used it. There's a lot of the trunks on the ship going down deep into the ship are painted deck blue, and they used it. We found blower rooms that are painted deck blue, so it worked. So they used it. And then last thing is this guy right here. You're like, well, what is this? Well, when the ship was built, or not when the ship was built, when CIC was built, the first kind of iteration of the space, the basic iteration of it, the air search radar was not the SK, it was an SC radar. And the SC was not, the transmitter was not in the space. It was down below in the radar motor generator room. And the crew, anytime the main battery fired, it would knock the SC out of operation. You know, it would jar a tube loose or something like that, or even a tube going out. So each time that happened, the crew would have to go down the ladder, down around the signal bridge, and over here, and open the hatch and go in. So they put in request after request to allow the Navy to put in a hatch here, or for the Bureau of Ships to let them put a hatch in here, and it was denied and denied and denied. So they're in the shipyard, and as Mr. Ed Reichert tells us, who is the I Division officer, the CIC officer, he said, well, we got denied, so we just gave a yard worker, a welder, a couple of cartons of cigarettes and asked him to cut this hatch in, and he did it. So, I mean, again, the ingenuity of sailors to get something done and expedite these things, and make something practical for them to work and again, to get it done. So with the hatch in place, now they could climb down the shelf here, get down there, change out what they need to change out, and get back out here without having to go out and be exposed out on the decks, say if the ship's like in the North Atlantic, or or actually under fire. So it just made it a lot simpler for the crew and a lot safer for the crew. And then go from there. One last thing to point out too, I keep talking about it, is I keep saying one last thing. I mean, I feel like Columbo here, but there's just so many little factoids and stuff to talk about CIC. I just can't stop. I mean, a lot of times when I'm getting tongue twisted here is again there's thinking of a fact, and it's like, well, that's too technical. Let me back off on that, and I get a little tripped up in my head. But the men in here, the radar operators, they were on the set. They were, operating for 15 minutes at a time. Even though their watch may be 4 hours, they were cycling in and out on 15-minute intervals, so their eyes stayed fresh. So especially just staring at a screen, at a CRT screen, that's got a SWIP or a sweep or pips or an A scope. So they cycle them in and out to keep them fresh. They would either go up on outside on top of CIC, or just do a collateral duty in here, like I said earlier. And then not only that, but guys, I Division, which is CIC, and the lookouts, got the pick of the ship. So guys coming onto the ship, if CIC was short men, to fill out the division, to fill out their complement in here, they would go to each, I guess, new draft of men coming aboard and find out who had certain talents and, or wanted to work in CIC, and would pick them before any of the other departments get an opportunity to do that. So that's how important this space was. So yeah. All right. So now we're going to walk down, and we're going to have a look at how long it takes to get to the radar motor generator room, and have a short look at that space. And here we are, the radar motor generator room. Well, now you see what it takes to get from CIC down to the radar motor generator room. And now you know why they want that hatch in. Imagine doing that, when the ship's in heavy seas or the ship's under fire in combat. Sailors, man, they're inventive. They'll get the job done, whether it's above board or not, or sanctioned or not. Rather, everything's above board. But whether it's officially sanctioned or not, they'll get it done. So this concludes our walkthrough of CIC, and if there's other spaces you want us to see, we're going to keep doing these space explorations. That's what we're going to call them, Battleship Texas Space Exploration. Yeah, kind of a homage to Space Battleship Yamato. Anyways, sorry, my nerd's slipping out. Well, that's kind of an oxymoron because I'm, a historian guy working on a battleship, so I'm just nerding out all the time. Anyways, so we're going to do more spaces. Let us know if there's anything you want to see. We'll probably go down and catch Radar 2 briefly, just to kind of recap. Even though it was auxiliary CIC, it was not redundant to this. It was mostly to help augment the workload that these guys were doing up here. There was a little bit of redundancy, but not a terrible amount. The SK operators were down there, and then, there was a redundant SG and a redundant plot, but that was about the end of the redundancy. So, yeah. Again, thanks for watching. Y'all have a good one.